April 20th, 1953, just after dawn, Bornholm Island, Denmark. The Baltic Sea is steel-gray and angry, slamming against the rocky shoreline as a silver shape drops out of the clouds. Radar operators at the small Danish airfield freeze, eyes locked on a blip that makes no sense. The aircraft is coming in fast, too fast, and too low. Its wings are swept back like a knife. Its engine screams with a pitch no Western jet can match. This is no NATO aircraft. The jet flashes overhead, paint gleaming, insignia unmistakable, a red star, Soviet markings, a MiG-15, brand new, immaculate, the most feared fighter in the skies of Korea, now lining up for landing on a neutral Danish island. And the pilot flying it is calm, almost elegant. Jørgen Jørgensen, Danish Air Force officer on duty, grabs binoculars and runs toward the runway as the jet flares, wheels touching down in a perfect textbook landing. No bounce, no hesitation. The pilot knows this aircraft intimately. This is not a defector fumbling his escape. This is a polished professional. The MiG rolls to a stop. The canopy lifts. A young man climbs out, removes his helmet, and looks around as if he expected this exact outcome. His flight suit is pristine. His posture is straight. His face betrays no fear, only calculation. Within minutes, Danish military police surround the aircraft. Orders are barked, weapons are raised. The pilot raises his hand slowly and speaks in clear, accented English. "My name is Viktor Ivanovich Belenko. I request political asylum." Across the Atlantic, when those words are finally transmitted through secure channels, U.S. intelligence officers will stare at each other in disbelief. Because what has just landed on Bornholm Island is not merely a defecting pilot, it is a technological miracle. The MiG-15 is the jet that shattered American air superiority in Korea. It climbs higher, accelerates faster, and turns tighter than anything the U.S. Air Force has in its inventory. It has humiliated B-29 bomber formations and forced American pilots to relearn air combat from scratch. Its engine, the Klimov VK-1, is rumored to be copied from British technology, but refined with brutality and precision. And now, unbelievably, one has been delivered intact. The Danish government moves fast. Bornholm is neutral ground, but this situation is radioactive. Soviet aircraft patrol the Baltic. Moscow will demand the jet's return. Copenhagen knows it cannot keep it, but they also know something else. Time is everything. The MiG is immediately towed into a hangar and covered. Guards are posted. The pilot is separated, questioned, fed, and watched. He does not resist. He does not rush. He answers when he chooses. He knows his value. By nightfall, secure cables reach Washington, Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters. When the briefing lands on the desk of Alan Dulles, Director of Central Intelligence, the room goes silent. Analysts reread the report line by line. A fully operational MiG-15, factory condition, combat ready. Landed voluntarily. Pilot trained at Soviet flight academies. No sabotage detected. This is the intelligence coup of the decade. Within hours, a plan is formed. Danish neutrality means the jet must eventually be returned, but eventually is a flexible word. U.S. Air Force engineers, intelligence officers, and technical specialists are quietly dispatched to Europe. Officially, they are advisors. Unofficially, they are thieves, racing against the clock. At Bornholm, under floodlights and secrecy, American and Danish technicians begin photographing every inch of the aircraft. Measurements are taken, panels are removed, gun bays opened, radar examined.
armor thickness measured with calipers. They discover shocking truths. The MiG is lighter than expected, cruder in some areas, but brutally efficient. Its 23mm and 37mm cannons are designed to shred bombers in seconds. Its wings are optimized for high-altitude combat, and its engine, powerful, temperamental, unforgiving, demands a skilled hand, which explains the pilot. Lieutenant Belenko is not a desperate man fleeing poverty. He is elite, carefully trained, politically disillusioned, yes, but operationally loyal until something snapped. During interrogation, he speaks clinically, offering details only a frontline pilot would know. He describes tactics, formation doctrines, climb profiles, weaknesses. He draws diagrams from memory, and he keeps glancing at the hangar. He wants them to understand what he's given them. As Soviet diplomats begin screaming demands into Danish embassies across Europe, U.S. intelligence realizes the scale of the moment. For the first time, the West can touch the enemy's crown jewel, not in fragments, not in rumors, but whole. Outside the hangar, the Baltic wind howls. Somewhere beyond the clouds, Soviet pilots are searching. The clock is ticking, because soon Moscow will come knocking, and when they do, the Americans must be gone with the knowledge that could change the balance of air power forever.
Night settles over Bornholm like a lid being pressed down. The hangar lights burn through the darkness, harsh and white, throwing long shadows across the concrete floor where the MiG-15 now sits stripped of its dignity, panels loosened, cameras clicking, hands moving fast. Inside a small, windowless room nearby, the pilot finally speaks again. He sits straight-backed, hands folded, eyes alert. Danish intelligence officers listen while an American Air Force major, newly arrived from Wiesbaden, leans forward. "You said your name was Victor Belenko," the major says carefully. The pilot does not flinch. "That name will be useful to you for a few more hours, but it is not my real one." The room tightens. "My real name is Franciszek Jarecki, First Lieutenant, Polish Air Force." The revelation lands like a hammer. Poland, not Soviet. Warsaw Pact, but not Moscow. The implications ripple instantly. This isn't a rogue Red Air Force pilot. It's a man from a satellite state, trained on Soviet equipment, flying Soviet doctrine, but not bound by Soviet loyalty. Jarecki exhales slowly, as if relieved the secret is finally out. "I did not defect on impulse," he says. "I planned this for months." He explains how he studied weather patterns over the Baltic, memorized fuel consumption down to the liter, rehearsed radio silence, calculated radar coverage gaps. He waited for a training flight that brought him close enough to the coast, close enough to neutral territory, to gamble everything. One wrong calculation, and he would have ditched into the Baltic. One delayed reaction, and Soviet interceptors would have torn him apart. Instead, he flew with absolute precision. Back in the hangar, American engineers crawl over the MiG like surgeons racing a heartbeat. They work in silence, photographing welds, measuring tolerances, tracing hydraulic lines. One man shakes his head as he inspects the wings. "They're using thicker skins here," he mutters. "Not elegant, just strong." Another engineer removes a panel near the nose and whistles softly. "No frills, no redundancy. This thing is built to fight, not to last." And that, the Americans realize, is the genius of it. The MiG-15 is not a luxury machine. It is a weapon mass-produced for war, cheap enough to build by the thousands, deadly enough to challenge anything the West can throw at it. Its simplicity makes it reliable. Its brutality makes it feared. As dawn approaches, Danish officials grow nervous. Soviet diplomats are no longer merely demanding, they are threatening.
Notes are delivered accusing Denmark of violating neutrality. Moscow insists the aircraft and pilot be returned immediately. Copenhagen stalls. They cite procedures, legal review, medical evaluation of the pilot. Behind the scenes, the Americans push harder. By mid-morning, crates begin appearing at the airfield, officially containing communications equipment. Unofficially, they are tools, cameras, and documentation kits. Every hour counts. Every bolt measured is knowledge the Soviets can never take back. Jarecki is brought to the hangar once more. When he sees the MiG, his MiG, surrounded by foreign hands, he does not protest. Instead, he walks the Americans through it. "Here," he says, tapping the fuselage, "this panel overheats during sustained climbs. Soviet pilots compensate by..."
The flight from Europe to the United States is long, quiet, and sealed in secrecy. Inside the transport aircraft, canvas seats vibrate with the engine's drone as a metal briefcase sits chained to a U.S. Air Force colonel's wrist. Inside are photographs, hand-drawn diagrams, engine measurements, and, most valuable of all, verbatim transcripts of Franciszek Jarecki's debriefings. When the aircraft touches down at Andrews Air Force Base, no press is waiting, no flags, no ceremony. Only black sedans and men who speak in low voices and never ask unnecessary questions. Within hours, the material is spread across tables in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon. And for the first time, the fear that has haunted American air planners since Korea began is given a face. Generals lean over photographs of the MiG-15's engine bay. Engineers point at grainy close-ups of weld seams and compressor blades. Intelligence analysts cross-reference Jarecki's words with combat reports from MiG Alley. Suddenly, patterns emerge. "This explains it," one analyst says, tapping a report from 1951. "Sabres thought the MiGs were climbing away. They weren't escaping, they were baiting." Another officer flips through the gun camera stills. "Look at this. Their cannon convergence is optimized for bomber formations, not dogfights. That's why our fighters survive head-on passes." The room fills with quiet realization. The MiG-15 is not invincible. It is specialized, designed to kill B-29s, designed to operate from rough airfields, designed for pilots trained to follow rigid doctrine, not improvisation. Jarecki's testimony confirms it. Soviet and Warsaw Pact pilots are taught to climb aggressively, attack in pairs, disengage vertically, and return to altitude. Individual initiative is discouraged, deviation is punished, creativity is dangerous. For American pilots already trained to improvise, this is a revelation. Within weeks, Tactical Command updates its engagement manuals. Sabre pilots are retrained to force MiGs into turning fights at lower altitudes, where the MiG's controls stiffen and its engine gasps. The kill ratio begins to shift. But Washington's interest goes far beyond Korea, because the MiG-15 is not just a fighter, it is a symbol. If the Soviets are willing to export this level of technology to satellite states, what else are they building at home? What improvements are coming next? At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, engineers recreate the MiG systems from memory and photographs. Mock-ups are built. Wind tunnel tests run day and night. American designers study the MiG's swept wings and rethink assumptions that had been dismissed only years earlier. The lessons learned from Jarecki's jet will echo into the next generation of aircraft. The F-100, the F-104, eventually the F-4 Phantom. Across the ocean, the political fallout is brutal. In Poland, Jarecki's name is scrubbed from rosters. His squadron is interrogated repeatedly. Friends vanish from service. Family members are demoted, reassigned, watched.
In Moscow, paranoia spreads. Flight plans are shortened, aircraft inventories are tightened, pilots are forbidden from flying near neutral borders. Political officers are placed closer to cockpits, sometimes literally sitting in the jump seat during training flights. The trust between pilot and state fractures. Meanwhile, Jarecki himself becomes a ghost. He is moved between safe houses, interviewed again and again by men who already know the answers. He is offered a new identity, a modest stipend, a life that will never be normal. When asked if he regrets it, he pauses. I loved flying that aircraft, but I did not love what it represented. In Korea, American pilots begin noticing something strange. The MiGs are more cautious now, less aggressive. They break off engagements earlier. They hesitate. The psychological edge is gone, because somewhere, deep in their command structure, Soviet officers know the truth. The West has seen inside the machine. By the time the MiG-15 is formally returned to Danish custody and ceremonially handed back to Warsaw Pact representatives, the aircraft is little more than a shell. No damage, no missing parts, nothing to protest diplomatically, but everything that mattered had already been taken. Years later, a retired CIA analyst will describe it bluntly. That landing didn't just give us a jet, it gave us the Soviet way of thinking. In the Cold War, information is the ultimate weapon, and on a gray April morning in 1953, one pilot carried more of it across enemy lines than any spy ever could. The MiG-15 would continue to fly. New variants would emerge. New pilots would climb into its cockpit. But the mystique was broken. The fear was gone. Because once you understand your enemy, truly understand him, he is never quite as dangerous again.
Summer 1953. The skies over Korea are still violent, but something fundamental has changed. U.S. pilots feel it the first time they push their sabers into a hard, low-altitude turn and watch a MiG overshoot, its wings shuddering, its pilot hesitating just long enough to lose the fight. Radio calls crackle with surprise, then confidence. Engagements end faster now. American squadrons return with fewer losses. No one mentions Bornholm Island aloud, but everyone feels its shadow. At Soviet air bases from Manchuria to Eastern Europe, the reaction is swift and merciless. New security protocols descend overnight. Pilots are grounded for re-education. Political officers lecture squadrons on loyalty, betrayal, and vigilance. Every cockpit becomes a potential escape route, every pilot a potential risk. Training changes, but not for the better. Fear replaces trust. Where once pilots had pushed the MiG to its limits, now they fly conservatively, conscious that every maneuver is being judged. Initiative shrinks, doctrine hardens. The aircraft remains deadly, but the men inside it are no longer free to think. Franciszek Jarecki understands this better than anyone. In a quiet, safe house somewhere in the American Midwest, he listens to the distant sound of civilian aircraft passing overhead. He recognizes engine notes instinctively. His hands twitch sometimes, as if gripping a control stick that is no longer there. He is debriefed one final time by a senior intelligence officer. You realize, the man says, that what you did will affect aviation for decades. Jarecki nods slowly. That was the point. He never flies a MiG again, never flies at all. But his defection becomes a template. Western intelligence agencies begin to actively encourage defections, not just of pilots, but of engineers, radar operators, missile technicians. Leaflets are dropped over conflict zones. Quiet promises are made through back channels. The idea is simple. If one man can bring an aircraft,
Another might bring a missile, and someone eventually will. The MiG-15 itself fades from the headlines, replaced by sleeker, faster machines, the MiG-17, the MiG-19, the MiG-21, each more capable than the last. But every new Soviet aircraft is now met with something different from the West: preparation. Because Bornholm taught U.S. intelligence a critical lesson. The Soviet Union builds formidable machines, but it also builds them with human weaknesses baked in: centralized control, rigid doctrine, fear of deviation. American designers lean into flexibility, redundancy, pilot autonomy. Dogfighting schools like Top Gun and the USAF Fighter Weapons School are expanded, their philosophy rooted in the belief that a thinking pilot beats a faster jet. All of it traces back to one landing. Years later, long after the Cold War has cooled, a declassified memo will summarize the event in understated bureaucratic language. April 1953 defection provided unprecedented insight into Warsaw Pact air combat capabilities. What it does not say is how close the balance once was, how a single aircraft, one runway, one decision tilted the scales. Bornholm Island returns to quiet anonymity. The hangar is repurposed, the runway patched and resurfaced. Tourists walk the shoreline, unaware that jets once circled overhead, weapons armed, waiting for orders that never came. And Franciszek Jarecki? He lives out his life under another name, another passport. He watches the Cold War play out on television, sees jets roar across skies he once ruled, and knows that for a brief moment he stood at the exact center of history. Not with a weapon, not with an army, but with a flawless landing on a neutral island in an aircraft that was never meant to be touched by the West. The day U.S. intelligence was stunned was not marked by explosions or speeches. It was marked by silence. The silence after wheels touched concrete. The silence of men realizing the enemy had just handed him his greatest secret.
Autumn 1958, 5 years after the landing on Bornholm. High above the Nevada desert, an American test pilot pushes a prototype fighter through its limits. The aircraft is faster than anything that came before it, its wings swept sharply back, its controls responsive at altitudes that once belonged only to reconnaissance planes. As he climbs, the pilot smiles inside his oxygen mask. The engineers told him this design philosophy came from hard lessons learned in Korea, lessons paid for in blood and aluminum. What they don't say is where many of those lessons truly began. They began with a MiG. In briefing rooms across the United States, instructors still show grainy photographs taken on a cold Danish island. Young pilots lean forward as instructors explain why enemy aircraft behave the way they do, why they climb, when they break off, where they hesitate. This, the instructor says, tapping the photo, is where we stopped guessing. The Cold War accelerates. Spy satellites replace binoculars, missiles begin to eclipse manned bombers, but air combat never disappears, it only evolves. And the idea that knowledge can be stolen cleanly, surgically, without a shot fired, becomes doctrine. The Soviets never truly recover their confidence in pilot loyalty. Even decades later, defectors are quietly encouraged to return or disappear. Aircraft are designed with tighter control systems, more automation, fewer chances for independent action. Ironically, this makes them easier to predict. Historians will later argue that the Cold War was won not by numbers, but by understanding, by the ability to see how the other side thinks, trains, fears, and reacts.
Franciszek Jarecki is rarely mentioned in public histories. His name appears in footnotes, in declassified appendices, in memoirs written by men who were never supposed to exist. But among intelligence professionals, his act is legendary, a perfect defection. No chase, no gunfire, no mistakes. Just a man, an aircraft, and a decision made at 30,000 feet. Somewhere, long after his death, a museum curator will stand beside a preserved MiG-15 and explain its significance to a group of visitors. This aircraft, he will say, changed how the West fought the Cold War. What he won't say, what he cannot fully explain, is that history sometimes turns not on battles or treaties, but on courage measured in seconds. On the moment a pilot lowers his landing gear instead of turning back. On the instant concrete rushes up to meet wheels that should never have touched it. That is when U.S. intelligence was stunned. Not by firepower, not by speed, but by the quiet realization that the most dangerous weapon the enemy possessed had just chosen to leave.